Watch closely. This isn't the debate you think it is, and it takes a turn you won't expect. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you think about this. Chris Cuomo brings on Donald Trump's own former economic advisor, Stephen Moore, expecting a debate, but what unfolds is something very different. Throughout this exchange, Cuomo methodically walks Moore into a series of uncomfortable realities about Trump's economic policies, especially on tariffs, small businesses, and the broader impact of his decisions. What makes this moment stand out is that Moore, the literal author of Trumponomics, is repeatedly forced to concede key points, from the economic pain Americans are feeling to the fact that Trump's own actions helped create the current instability. And as Cuomo presses him on how small businesses are being squeezed while corporations benefit, the gap between Trump's pro-business image and the real-world consequences becomes impossible to ignore.
So let's discuss what should be done and what the real deal is. Trump's former senior economic advisor, literally the author of Trumponomics, the book, Mr. Stephen Moore. It's good to see you, sir. Thank you for coming on instead of watching the Knicks-Sixers game.
Great to be with you.
So, first of all, how wrong am I about what the president could do unilaterally? What would happen, forget about politics, what would happen if he were to say, look, I'm going to sign executive orders that the way companies get regulated within executive agencies is going to be, in part, a function of how they treat workers?
Well, first of all, look, bravo to what you just said. I am, look, you're exactly right. Small businesses are, baseball and apple pie in this country. And it's a unique thing about America is that we have so many millions of small businessmen, and so the men and women who started businesses, it's a courageous thing to start a new business. And as you said, half the jobs in America are created by small businessmen and women. So I agree entirely with you that the country can only do as well as our small businesses do. Now, look, at the same time, we have some of the greatest corporations in America. 9 of the top 10, technology companies in America today are here in the U.S., whether you're talking about NVIDIA or Google or Apple or Amazon. I want everybody to do well. I want our corporations to do well because, look, we all own them. We all have 401k plans. But you're right to say that
about half of us have 401k plans.
Well, but Trump has a new plan so that everybody could get a 401k plan. But
yeah, but they don't.
I think here's where I disagree with you a little bit. I think that it's hand in glove. The better big businesses do, the better small businesses do. If you have a pro-business environment, and Trump is a pro-business president, in my opinion, everybody can do better, and that includes big businesses, small businesses, and workers.
Yeah, except they don't treat them the same. That's the problem. Most small businesses, as you know, Stephen, and I don't mean to condescend at all, you have much, much more understanding of this than I ever will, and you've been very good to me and helping me understand over the years, even when we disagree. But they don't get taxed like C Corps. They're flow-through, they're flow-through entities, and it's basically like a personal income tax with a couple of extra deductions. They just don't get prioritized, and they're under incredible pressure right now, especially because of the tariffs. And I just don't understand why nothing's being done for them.
Well, listen, you made a very important point about how do small businesses pay taxes? They pay taxes at the small business rate. That's one of the reasons, as you know, Art Laffer and I and Larry Kudlow wrote the very first version of that Trump tax bill. It was really designed to help small businesses to pay lower tax rates so they could invest more in their businesses. We also allowed them to write off their if they want to buy, build a new plant or purchase equipment and so on, they can build that off. So I do believe this was a pro-small business tax cut. We lowered their tax rate. We did a lot of things to make them more profitable. And listen, have we hit a bump in the road on the economy? Absolutely, we have. No question about it. And you're exactly right. Americans are pissed off about the price of gas and the price of groceries. But, let's look at, the first year of Trump's economy was very good. Iran has changed the picture. But I'm here to tell you, if we can prevail in Iran and we can get that Strait of Hormuz open and those gas prices down, I think we'll see a return to the Trump boom that we saw in his first term and his first year. That is my hope. And I feel very strongly in predicting it's going to happen.
Let's agree on two things. One, the regime in Iran sucks. Agreed?
No question.
Second, we didn't hit a bump in the road. He put bumps in the road. And he is not the regime. It's President Trump. He did the tariffs. He started this war as the avenue of opportunity of what to do with the regime. They didn't start this. We did. They may deserve it. That's a different question. But the economic pressure that we're under right now is largely because of his actions, Stephen. I'm not saying you would have recommended them, but that's the fact.
It is a fact, no question about it. And people will make up their own mind about Trump's line, which he says this is short-term pain, and certainly we're experiencing short-term pain for long-term gain. I'm right now, and I'm not a big interventionist myself, but look, if he can prevail here, if we can liberate this country from tyrants that were killing tens of thousands of their own people and had a nuclear weapon. Again, this isn't my area of expertise. I'm simply saying that if people feel that this was an important thing to do to make the world safer, yeah, there's some sort of pain here, but the world could be a better and more prosperous place with a freer Iran. But we got to get the oil flowing again, because energy is the master resource. Every time energy costs go up, prices of everything else go up. And so that's a problem, no question about it.
You know, you said something earlier, and it's actually a good idea. It'd be even better if it were the way you put it. You say, we change the small business tax rate. There's no such thing as a small business tax rate. Those are flow-through entities. You pay at the individual level.
That's right.
I'm not saying you're trying to be deceptive.
That's right.
You sneaky bastard.
No, right.
What I'm saying is that C Corps get, one, they have a business tax rate. Why don't you create a small business tax rate? Why don't you pass a bill to incentivize small businesses and artisans and say, hey, we're shifting money from college, which is not necessarily a great return on investment unless you're a STEM kid or want to be a professor. And we're going to move it to the trade schools, and we're going to incentivize people to go into those trades, because for every 5 we lose, we're only getting 2. And you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars and be entrepreneurs. Why not that? Why not do that instead of just having the White House say the reality is not what your lying eyes is telling you?
Well, I love that idea. Let's work together to do that. I mean, college is a ripoff, in my opinion, for a lot of the people who attend college. I think it's one of the greatest financial scandals in America, how much these universities are charging our families. And it's the fastest rate of growth in inflation. You mentioned gas prices. Look what's happened to you. You know, when I went to University of Illinois 35 years ago, it was $1,000 a semester. Now it's $10,000 a semester. And you're absolutely right. What are they learning? Well, we're turning out a lot of kids with philosophy degrees and political science degrees. There's not a lot of demand now. Now, you're also right. This is a very important point you're making. So I'm glad you're making. Look, you know what electricians are making these days? I mean, you can make $150,000 a year as an electrician, or people in the trades, and people work with their hands. It's amazing. So I'm all for that, and we have to put more pride into that too. Everybody doesn't have to go to college. You and I went to college, but it's not for everyone. And people who work with their hands and do the service jobs in this country. Look, auto mechanics. Ford says they have 10,000 auto mechanic jobs open, but a lot of people don't know how to do that work. So I have great respect for working class Americans, and to spend $100,000 for a college degree and then you can't get a job, that's a scandal.
Let me tell you something. Anybody can do what I can do. Not anybody can fix your HVAC system.
That's true.
Let me tell you, they are artisans. They are artisans, and
I agree.
We need to respect them.
I feel so blessed that I get to do what I do, but it isn't as hard as fixing a car, fixing an air conditioner, or do all these other jobs. So God bless those people. But I'm pro-America. I'm pro-small business. I think I'm with you 80% of the time on these issues.
Well, listen, I'm all about, I hate calling them the trades. I hate blue collar. I hate all those things. Even my father had a line he used to use all the time about the digital economy, or what now would be AI. And he would say, the thick fingers of the laborer are not accommodated to the keyboard. And even that, I'm like, listen, Pop, these guys are so sophisticated. In your business, remember the old, who was it, Coolidge, who say, give me a president with only one hand, an economist with one hand, because they're always saying on the other hand. And in my business, all you got to do is ask questions. Let me tell you, it's not open to interpretation as to whether or not your lights work. So anyway,
well,
I just think that there's an opportunity.
You know what else, Chris, that Calvin Coolidge said? The business of America is business. And I think that's so true. So I'm saluting, and this is Small Business Week. Absolutely. And by the way, it ain't
Yeah.
easy. I mean, small business men and women, they work not 40, they work 50, 60, 70 hours a week.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're making it harder for them. That's why they're so frustrated. And I know my phone's going to blow up tonight about how it's National Business Week and he's saying one thing and they're living another one. We hear you. That's what we're doing here at News Nation. And Stephen, thank you for being a productive part of the conversation. I appreciate it.
What makes this exchange so revealing isn't just that Chris Cuomo challenged Stephen Moore. It's that he did it using Moore's own framework, his own expertise, and ultimately forced him into a position where he could no longer defend the reality of Trump's economic record without conceding the damage. And that's the key point here. When Donald Trump's own former economic advisor is sitting there admitting piece by piece that Americans are feeling real economic pain, that tariffs are contributing to that pressure, and that energy shocks are driving up costs across the board, you're no longer dealing with partisan criticism. You're dealing with acknowledgement from inside Trump's own economic circle. Cuomo zeroes in on something that often gets lost in political messaging, the difference between rhetoric and lived reality. Stephen Moore tries to fall back on the familiar talking points: short-term pain for long-term gain, pro-business environment, Trump boom. But every time he does, Cuomo brings him back to the actual consequences. Small businesses are under pressure, prices are up, energy costs are rising. And crucially, these aren't random events. They are tied directly to policy decisions, tariffs, geopolitical escalation, and economic strategy coming out of the Trump administration. That moment where Moore admits flat out that Trump's actions contributed to the current economic strain, that's the entire ballgame, because it destroys the central defense that Trump allies rely on, that these problems are external, inherited, or unavoidable. Cuomo makes it crystal clear this isn't something that just happened to Trump. This is something Trump did. And then there's the small business argument, which is where Cuomo really exposes the contradiction. Republicans, and Trump in particular, love to brand themselves as champions of small business. But as Cuomo points out, the system doesn't actually treat small businesses the same as large corporations. They don't get the same tax advantages, the same prioritization, or the same protection from economic shocks. And when tariffs hit, when supply chains tighten, when costs go up, it's small businesses that feel it first and hardest. Moore tries to defend the tax cuts as pro-small business, but even there, Cuomo dismantles the framing. There is no distinct small business tax rate in the way it's being sold. These are pass-through entities, taxed at the individual level. Meanwhile, corporations benefit from structured advantages that small operators simply don't have. That's not a level playing field, it's a systemic imbalance.
And what's striking is that Moore doesn't really refute that. He pivots, he agrees in part, he shifts the conversation, but he doesn't dismantle Cuomo's point, because he can't. Then you get to the broader issue of responsibility, and this is where Cuomo draws a line that's impossible to blur. The economic strain tied to rising fuel costs, global instability, and disrupted markets, Trump allies want to point to Iran, to global conditions, to anything external. But Cuomo cuts through that instantly. Trump didn't just respond to global events, he helped create the conditions. He initiated the tariffs, he escalated the conflict, he chose the strategy. And when those decisions have consequences, you don't get to pretend they came out of nowhere. That's a level of accountability that you almost never see applied this directly on mainstream political television, especially to someone like Stephen Moore, who is deeply embedded in Republican economic messaging. And yet Cuomo forces that accountability in real time. The most important takeaway here is this. When you strip away the branding, when you move past the slogans, and when you confront the policies with actual outcomes, the narrative that Trump is good for the economy starts to collapse under its own weight. Not because Democrats are saying it, but because the facts and even Trump's own allies can't fully defend it without conceding the downsides. And that's why this moment matters. Because it shows that the debate isn't really about ideology anymore. It's about reality versus spin. And in this case, reality won.